ready to start here. Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Rahul. We'll be talking about SharePoint 2016. I'm going to give you an overview, but as well as talk about some of the new capabilities and also dive into a little bit of demo. We are waiting on for a couple more folks to sign in, but we'll go ahead and get started. If you're facing difficulty in hearing the audio feed or viewing the presentation, please feel free to type that down in the chat. You should see a little chat window on your bottom left-hand side corner. You can click on that and engage in a question or any audio video difficulties at any time. So we're going to get started here, and I'm going to talk through our agenda real quick. So we want to take a step back and just talk about some of the enhancements and features that's been organically evolved to get to SharePoint 2016. What is the future of SharePoint? Because there's been step back and look at that. We're going to take a holistic view of SharePoint 2016 in general. We will look at it from both the standpoint of SharePoint Server on-premise as well as SharePoint on the cloud. And as we look into the future, they're being more and more tightly integrated, so it's helpful to look at them both as a single product. And once we're done with the overview, I want to dive into what I think are some of the more important capabilities in SharePoint 2016. Everything from infrastructure deployment, there's been a significant change in some of the rollout strategy. I want to talk about some of the new user experience changes, big improvements in analytics, compliance reporting, and also look at some deployment topologies to enable a true hybrid cloud scenario. And lastly, we want to take a step back and look at what does it mean for your organization to use 2016. Should you upgrade? What platform are you using today, and does that make sense from a strategic standpoint to upgrade to 2016, or should you wait? And I think we can engage in more of a two-way dialogue here, and hopefully we can reserve some time for some question answers, but feel free to ask away questions throughout the presentation. So as we look at SharePoint 2016, how it's kind of landed into what Microsoft is describing as a cloud-inspired experience, I want to take a step back and look at how we got here, right? So SharePoint originally started, as you all know, as a document file and sharing collaboration system. But that's been sort of morphed into more of a content management system, especially since SharePoint Server 2007 and beyond is when SharePoint was viewed as a serious contender for an intra-network collaboration portal standpoint. And that story has been continuously improved from 2007 to 2010. I think SharePoint Server 2010 is when we first saw the biggest shift in terms of user experience. We got the new ribbon bar, very tight Office integration, as well as enhanced capability for IT administrators to get more granular control or deployment topology. There's been quite a bit of dramatic shift in 2010. Between 2010 and 2013, it's really been a more of a deployment enhancement, if you will, in SharePoint Server 2013. We haven't seen a dramatic shift in the architecture. It was building on the foundation laid in 2010, and 2013 really was an enhancement in terms of feature polish and brought in some new capabilities such as a new app platform, and it was kind of the first taste of what's to come, and it was the first version to also unlock some of the hybrid cloud scenario to align with Office 365. So I want to call SharePoint Server 2016 more of a comprehensive refresh, if you will, of SharePoint Server 2013. From an architectural standpoint, there's a lot of similarity in terms of both customization development capability, but it's also giving us a taste of the future, kind of like what 2013 did when it first came out. So for example, Microsoft new customization model has been using the new app model platform. And you kind of get a glimpse of that by the deprecation of SharePoint Designer, as just as an example. And we'll look at some of those feature sets and changes in a little bit. But I think it's important to know some of the focus areas of SharePoint 2016. And really, majority of the capabilities in 2016 was inspired by the cloud. So we've got a truly immersive hybrid cloud search capability. SharePoint add-in platform is now fully unified with the Office 365 platform as well. If you're not aware of this before, we have a whole new SharePoint marketplace and an app store where we can deploy and download apps that can work consistently on a cloud platform as well as an on-premise platform. From a management standpoint, some of the differences in provisioning search application configuration has been bridged. So for the most part, we have a lot of similarity in how you can configure and deploy a 2016 platform and Office 365. And that takes us to what I like to call if you want to summarize SharePoint 2016, it's really three buckets, right? Let's look at the new features. Some of the capability that's for a taste to come has been deprecated, and a cloud-inspired architecture. So that the focus area of SharePoint 2016 is really in three buckets, if you will. So first up, like I said, it's a comprehensive refresh. So one of the improvements in 2013 and a taste to what's to come was a responsive web design. While out of the box, SharePoint 2013 worked well with mobile devices, but we didn't really have a full solution. We don't have a really good story for a mobile experience. We got a responsive design, but that doesn't quite paint the full picture. We needed a more tight integration in terms of having a direct app integration or better capability to browse through documents and lists. And Microsoft has listened to some of that feedback, and as part of 2016, we've got a whole new SharePoint Mobile App, as well as the existing OneDrive for Business mobile app has also been enhanced. Another important feature set that's been added in 2016 is improved analytics. And this has always been one of SharePoint's biggest weakness ever since it's been first rolled out. We've seen some analytics enhancement in 2010 in terms of site analytics. We can kind of tell how many users visited a site, the kind of documents they may have clicked on, but it was more of just a site counter more than any individual user profile. So we needed a better way to know, hey, what's the status of my document repository? How many people have truly accessed my site? What are they doing in my site? What are some of the trends in terms of sharing and happening in my SharePoint site? This was a difficult question to answer in the past without resorting to third-party tools. Lastly, I think one of the bigger features in 2016 is document library and file sharing has always been one of the bread and butter of SharePoint and is usually one of the initial use cases for utilizing the platform. And from a document library and management standpoint, it's been greatly enhanced, not in just terms of UI, but also coupling with the Office Web App Server, as well as tight integration with the new Security and Compliance Center, which we'll take a look in just a second. And there's really been a lot more integration in terms of both analytics, compliance, and security into what's Microsoft calling as a new modern library platform. And this is the third bucket in the analytics toolset, if you will. So we've got the SharePoint Farm Analytics, Site Analytics, and Document Analytics has been one of the most requested feature set, especially if you look at the SharePoint User Voice Forum. It's consistently being ranked at the top as a better way to understand how users are consuming my content, and it's given equal parity in terms of importance of how you can author content, which has been solved with 2013 and the tight Office integration. The next important aspect of 2016 is really a true integration story with Office 365. So starting from 2013, we've had some level of integration, but it was mostly limited to just redirects and a functional search engine, but it could have been better. As part of 2016, in terms of a unified search story, that story has dramatically changed. You can now have a unified search experience for both Office 365 as well as on-premise. in a variety of different topology. And as an IT administrator, you have far better control on how you want documents to be indexed, stored, when should be crawled, redirects to both on-premise and online. The story has greatly improved. Another big change in, although from a impact standpoint is quite big, from an implementation standpoint is not that dramatic, is a unified user interface with Office 365. So one of the jarring differences in 2013 and integrating that with Office 365 was, from a pure user interface standpoint, it didn't have a very consistent experience. A user could generally tell when they're being redirected, if you will, from an on-premise to an online system. And as far as SharePoint Server 2016, the user interface and the overall navigation schema between a cloud platform and the on-premise platform is much better. And unless you're really trying hard, it's very difficult to tell apart when you're being redirected between both instances. And I think that's very important because it truly enables a seamless hybrid story, which was quite difficult in the past. And lastly, SharePoint Server 2016 has got a variety of new compliance and reporting capabilities, and most of that is from the analytics and the compliance center standpoint, because SharePoint has always had a pretty good story around e-discovery and a kind of a primitive compliance capability, but it was limited to very basic use cases. For anything beyond a simple need of finding a little bit of a content, you always had to resort to third-party content. As an example, if you'd like to find an audit check of sensitive information within your SharePoint platform, either you had to do that completely manual, which in most cases is highly time sensitive, and more than likely you're not in the business of fine-tuning SharePoint search. We didn't have a good story around that. But with the advent of the Compliance Center, we've got well over 51 pre-templated design patterns that will allow us to find a variety of information that can be aligned with a variety of regulatory compliance or a specific use case, like finding a credit card information. Going hand in hand with the Compliance Center is a new data loss prevention system. And we didn't really have a good DLP capability until 2016. Office 365 has had it for some time, but in 2016, we can truly define DLP policies that will allow an administrator to take action before or after a document or piece of content with a certain type of sensitive information is placed on the platform. And this can also work hand in hand with Office 365 as well as Exchange. So we've got a more tighter integration of data loss prevention between both platforms. We already talked about reporting and analytics, so I'm going to go ahead and just jump to a quick demo. But before that, I described SharePoint 2016 as a comprehensive refresh, and while from the outside it kind of looks it looks very similar, there's a lot going under the hood, and it's important to understand some of the fine-tuning to truly understand how it can benefit your organization. So before I dive into a demo, I wanted to cover some basics very quickly, because these are the most common questions I've received whenever we talk about SharePoint 2016. So the biggest change in terms of acquiring SharePoint 2016 is we just have one version. There is no more foundation. So if you are relying on SharePoint Foundation, you really don't have an equivalent model in the 2016 world. It's just SharePoint Server 2016, and you can differentiate between some feature set by using a standard or enterprise CAL from a CAL perspective. No more SharePoint Designer 2016. So SharePoint Designer has been a pinnacle of SharePoint customization ever since, I believe, 2007. As far as 2016, if you've noticed from 2010, there's been a new and improved capability to both customize the SharePoint platform from a design perspective, and as well as also change the look and feel and adding new capability, while we had the ability to edit an individual page or a collection of pages directly in SharePoint Designer, these are always a little cumbersome, especially when we talk about an upgrade, right? A custom JavaScript or a custom piece of code integrated in within a page is difficult to transition into a newer version, and it's also difficult to maintain. But isolated units of functionality, kind of like web parts, but living outside of SharePoint, is a much better capability from a maintenance standpoint. Well, that being said, there is no SharePoint Designer 2016, but if you have used SharePoint Designer in the past to make some level of changes or edits to your platform, you can continue using SharePoint Designer 2013 with 2016, but know that it is not a scalable model anymore. So I would consider, think twice before blazing that trail. You probably want to look at the new Design Manager for customizing SharePoint, or the new SharePoint add-in capability for custom functionality. So prior to, I think right about SharePoint Server 2013 launch, Microsoft made a big announcement that InfoPath 2013 InfoPath Form Services are both technically deprecated, and there has been no new features or enhancement in the 2013 release, with the intent that prior to SharePoint 2016, we should have some kind of a direction on a next-gen form technology. That's been pushed to future release. A lot of people are looking forward to that, but it looks like we're going to have to wait a little bit, but perhaps not very long, and I'll talk about that in just a second. There is no longer a standalone install mode. If you would like to install a single server, we have a new single server role, and the system requirements for rolling out 2016 is nearly identical to the 2013 platforms. If you've got 2013, or if you have planned infrastructure in preparation for 2013, chances are you should be good for 2016 as well, except for perhaps SQL Server. You would need SQL Server 2014 Service Pack 1 or higher. The other big change is a lot of limitations in terms of a document library or list view size and thresholds have all been increased. It's probably boilerplate to go over that one by one, but I would encourage you to look at SharePoint Server 2016 boundaries and limits to learn more about that. I'm not going to go into system requirements. It's very similar to 2013, but I do want to talk about the new infrastructure changes in 2016, which is what you may have heard of as the new min role deployment model. So taking a step back, in prior SharePoint releases, you could have a single server installation, you could have a two-tier or a multi-tier SharePoint topology with specific servers for search, web front-end, application servers, cache servers, and even search and crawling servers. While we always had that capability, it was not a physical separation, it was more of a logical separation. So, for example, even though the web servers are primarily intended for serving web requests, you may have noticed that SharePoint still provisions Internet Information Services or your web services on all servers. That has always been a bit of a challenge in streamlining that, because this was a default behavior. And rolling out a piece of functionality to a server was simply turning a service on and off, versus not deploying a specific component aligned to a specific need. For example, on a search server, you would expect to only install search capability, not the whole SharePoint platform. So that's always been a little bit of a tricky subject, especially when we talk about a truly physically isolated SharePoint rollout in a multi-server standpoint. And that story has dramatically changed in 2016. We have dedicated server roles for front-end application, cache, and you can also define your own custom templates. And that allows you to roll out a topology that's very streamlined with minimal resource overhead specific to a server need when and where necessary. And the way you would do that is you can predefine these roles and capability at the time of installation, but you can also make changes post-provisioning, and you will notice that the services section has a little bit of a change, and it looks a little different in the services area. And I'm not going to go into too detail on this. As I said, with the new min role capability, we've got specific roles and services in that you can choose at the time of installation, and these are some of the out-of-the-box templates and capabilities that you can choose from. But I'm going to skip over this and talk about some of the more IT-specific infrastructure changes. But here's just a quick snapshot of all the services that you can rely on. The other big change in 2016 is a zero downtime patching. And this has always been a difficult issue in SharePoint in general, because for updates and feature packs, we always had to have a maintenance window, bring the server down, run the product configuration wizard, and that's not been a very good user experience, especially from a IT standpoint, to do patches or updates. But with SharePoint 2016, we have the ability to do a zero downtime patching, and more importantly, SharePoint updates no longer takes several hours. We've got far smaller update footprint, and you can bring down specific services one by one and patch them independently without having to do a full-on update on all servers at the same time, which has always been a little difficult. Distributed cache has also been greatly improved. It was kind of a mystery box until this point, where we turn on the distribution cache system, but we didn't have a whole lot of insight on how it actually works and how to control some of the finer parameters of it. But in 2016, we got a little bit more control over it, and as well as a better story for maintaining higher SLA overall. But I'm not going to go through this either. Let's look at some of the new user experience capabilities. But before I do that, let me jump to a quick demo so that we don't have death by PowerPoint here. And what I'm going to do is perhaps bounce back and forth between a SharePoint Server 2016 installation and as well as an Office 365 platform. And there's a couple of reasons for it, and something that we didn't talk about. Until SharePoint Server 2016, we always had what I'm going to call a big bang release approach. We've got a major release and follow-up service packs that's not really adding new functionality, but more of patches and fixes. With SharePoint Server 2016, the rollout strategy from Microsoft has changed. So we are no longer looking at a SharePoint Server 2016 with all the features from day one. Instead, it's being unitized into feature packs that's going to be gradually rolled out throughout 2016, 2017, and beyond. And kind of like Windows 10, where instead of major service packs, we're now seeing smaller updates that gives us entirely new functionality without a full OS release. That's kind of the same model that SharePoint 2016 as well. So this creates a tricky scenario where, while we have all these features to talk about, not all of them are available in 2016 just yet, at least on the server standpoint. But most of the features that we talked about just now are available in the Office 365 world. And I will talk about some of the differences between the Office 365 world and SharePoint Server on-premise instances when and where needed. Also keep in mind the hybrid scenario and other capabilities are baked in from day one. So if you'd like to get started using the platform with the intention of making updates as future feature packs are rolled up, you are free to do that from day one. And also their first feature pack, I think it happens, it happened just yesterday or the day before was the first feature pack release. So it's good timing on the webinar. So what I've got up on the screen is a demo instance of Office 365 with some pre-loaded SharePoint content. Obviously, you can see the home page and the landing page looks a little different. This is not the look and feel of 2016 out of the box. This is just a demo template as part of a Microsoft Office demos platform. So what I want to do is first off, take a lap around some of the new analytics capability, and I think that's probably more interesting than some of the other capabilities. But we'll also look at some of the compliance features as well. So right off the bat, I want to start with what we can call the farm level analytics. So we now have some insight into the SharePoint site collection or web application as a whole. You're looking at a Delve analytics here, which is part of the Office 365 world. The on-premise analytics at a farm level is going to look a little different, but already you can see there's some important metrics here, and some of them are quite interesting. So, for example, the analytics model here are based on you as a person who's viewing the site. So your collaboration are listing people that I have at some shape or form either sent emails or had document shared links sent back and forth. Losing touch lists people who I've had interactions in the past but have not yet made an email exchange or connection, which is kind of interesting. But more importantly, it also pulls some analytics from Exchange and as well as some usage analytics. So you'll remember this, it wasn't called Focus Hours, but we had site analytics in 2013. This is being funneled through a new report template. So everything you do in the 2016 world is being tracked in kind of like a tabular model behind the scenes, which you can then build reports kind of like this using Power BI or Power Pivot or Power View on top of it and surface it. But this is just at a Office 365 tenant level, which is less important from an on-premise world. But when we look at an individual site, however, this is probably more interesting for a on-premise installation. So for example, I've got the home page that I just showed you open at a site contents perspective, and it's showing me some of the site visits and trending content. But more importantly, it also shows me some of the site analytics, such as who's been visiting, how many times, and what they've been doing. Now, I don't have all of those analytics capabilities to show you, but I have got screenshots and other capability that I can, primarily because some of that feature set is being slated for the second half of 2016. So you will see these being rolled out in the next couple of months. But we've got a beta feature pack that's already out, which has some of that capability. But from a look and feel perspective, the only other major change you can physically see in this SharePoint Server 2016 world is the document library. And that's been changed a little bit compared to a on-premise instance. And here's a SharePoint Server running on a virtual machine here on my computer. You'll see that the team site, by and large, hasn't changed all that much, with the exception of perhaps the title bar here on the top. This allows us to easily transition between an Office 365 SharePoint site and an on-premise SharePoint site. And this also goes into enabling a truly seamless hybrid experience. So for example, I've already linked my local SharePoint installation here into the demo instance. So if I use the little app launcher here and I click on Sites, it's going to redirect me to the Office 365 world. But more importantly, it's not immediately obvious that we just switched our environments completely from an on-premise platform to a Office 365 platform, because by and large they look the same. And the hub pages here, the recent sites that you're looking at here, are coming from Office 365, but it goes both ways. So for example, I can follow a site on-premise and expect to see the same follower site in the Office 365 world as well, which allows for a good integration. I can also do a search, and it's going to take me to the Office 365 Search Center, which has got content from both on-premise and online as well. And the new Compliance Policy Center is an entirely new site collection template for on-premise. And if you're on Office 365 today, you must have seen the new Security and Compliance Center. This is, in some shape or form, the on-premise version of that. But you'll notice there's some difference in capability, but the templates and the sensitive information templates and e-discovery templates are all present in the on-premise instance as well. And you can also specify DLP and all that good stuff in both on-premise and Office 365. In addition to the e-discovery center, we also have a new in-place hold policy center. And this works hand in hand with the compliance policy center, where we can choose a predefined template, and then kind of like what you could do in e-discovery, you could define a template based on a search query type and set that and set a hold on that, which you can then review and export at a later point in time. But this allows you to do it in a much smaller capacity, whereas in e-discovery you've got some more refining capabilities on top of that. And there's a little bit more to show you in terms of from a demo perspective, but I want to take a step back and also talk about something I can show you, which is a new mobile experience. And this experience is already out on iOS. So if you own an Apple device, you can get your hands on the new SharePoint Mobile App, and you can see how you could see a mobile view of what's on the right-hand side, which was just a files library. And you can view it in a tile format if it's a media asset library. You can view just in a list format if you like. You can also view the actual site in all its glory. Or if you're in a hurry and if you're trying to get to a piece of content or a list item, you can navigate through your SharePoint topology purely through the sites and subsites and document libraries and lists without going through the actual user interface, which has always been a bit of an issue in the mobile world, where even with a responsive design, all it takes is one minor feature or one little issue in your template, and it breaks your mobile UI, and you can't get to a piece of content because of either a product update or an issue with the responsive design. But with a dedicated mobile app that's ignoring all the design aspect and is purely using SharePoint web services to expose content, you're no longer limited by the templates or the user interface in itself. If you're on Office 365 or SharePoint Server 2016, this experience is going to work regardless of your customization. And by and large, the mobile app is used to navigate through your site, documents, and files. But you can also view your user profile, including any custom fields or properties you may have defined on a profile page. And you can also share documents and also copy documents between the SharePoint document libraries and OneDrive for Business, which are both tightly integrated in both Office 365, SharePoint Server, and now on the mobile app as well. Let's skip over some of these capabilities here. If you use Project Server, just so you know, Project Server is no longer a separate installation. it is integrated directly into the SharePoint platform. So from a user experience standpoint, it looks very consistent. The other cool capability I want to talk about is durable links. You must be familiar with permalinks or permanent links, where you can have a link to a resource, and regardless of its physical location, you can gain access to it without breaking a link in itself. So this has always been an issue in the past, where if you bookmark a piece of content or if you shared some content, but if you need to do a little restructuring, move things around, the links and any hard links to the piece of content, including shared links, would have failed. SharePoint 2013 and I believe 2010 also had a document ID system, which guarantees a unique document ID. But unless you use the get a link function, you could not get a permanent link to a piece of content. But that's being dramatically changed in 2016, where you can gain a direct link to a content, and you can move the file, you can even rename it, move it to a different site collection even, but the durable link will stay with that piece of content. And it's not just limited to documents. You can also use it to link list items as well. And it's got a separate topology and security abstraction for guest links, where if you move a document that was previously shared from a public location to a SharePoint location that's no longer anonymous, for example, the experience will follow. The security restriction that you impose on the document will continue to live with the document, where it says giving a blanket access regardless of its location. So there's a little bit more intelligent than just a direct link. Another cool capability is our apps integration. So in Office 365, we've had Microsoft Flow, which is a new platform for workflows in general. And we've had Workflow Manager for quite some time. Think about Flow as a I don't want to say an enhancement. It's a different platform, but we've got a direct integration between any Flow workflows or Flow-based apps or Power Apps and Office 365 and SharePoint Server as well. So you could technically define a workflow or a Power App in Office 365 world, but have it linked to the SharePoint on-premise as well. And we already looked at some of the analytics. And here's a quick snapshot of Office 365 Analytics at a tenant level. And we looked at site contents. Well, the site that I was sharing from a demo perspective didn't have a lot of activity, so it didn't have a lot of analytics to show us. But here's how it could look like with if there's if it's an active site and you have a lot more detailed view into how the site is being used. And perhaps the single most important information from here is the trending content area. And you can hit view all on the trending content and see not just trending content, you can also see documents by its popularity, number of views, number of edits, and that kind of thing. And this has not been possible in 2013 simply because the analytics stopped at the site level, and we really couldn't tell if users were consuming documents, and more importantly, who is consuming document. But that has been changed. But in addition to just providing the information, we also have a data model under the hood. So if you're relying on a custom report to see, hey, a good use case is how many users have viewed my training videos, and did everyone in the organization really read our new policy and procedure update? So those kinds of information are available under the hood in a data model, and you can use Excel or Power Pivot or Power View to open up the data model and create reports on top of it. We have a admin center report library with some of them predefined, but you can create custom reports directly with the data model. Site report is the extension of just the reports that I showed you just now, where we can see a full list of document usage and document analytics in terms of what's being added, the rate at which new content is being authored or changed, as well as who is viewing what. This is we looked at an individual user profile analytics just a while ago, and that comes from Delft. And while it's being powered by Delft, if you've got a Office 365 and SharePoint Server hybrid topology, you can still continue to leverage information exchange between both platforms. Before we get into the Compliance Center, I want to also take, I forgot to show perhaps one of the more important capabilities. And as I already talked about, this is just a standalone SharePoint site collection, and I just deployed a new team site on an on-premise capacity. But more importantly, as I add and remove documents from the site collection here, we can control pieces of content within an individual team site by utilizing compliance and DLP templates that we can define. And it's being a little slow here. And you can see that how the activity will continue to show. But while that's loading, let me switch gears real quick and also talk a little bit about an individual document analytics. So I'm in a finance document library, and as I click on an individual document, you can see how it's showing a lot of information about its history, who created it, and if you had shared this document with someone else, you can view that information here as well. And document level analytics has been one of the most requested features for the SharePoint platform, and now we can get to it without relying on third-party features. Also, you can view compliance details of a document directly at the document level. So if you're not really sure if your document is breaking a compliance rule or regulatory rule that your administrator has defined, there's usually visual cues that will tell you, but you can also right-click on a document, view it directly, and also print out an audit log report. For now, I haven't specified any compliance or DLP rules, so it's going to say I'm good. But document retention and compliance in general has also been a very highly requested feature, especially for document retention in terms of how many days should you retain a document, what's the archiving capacity. Previously had to use several workarounds to define custom policies and workflows or third-party tools, but now we have a lot of that capability out of the box. So from a compliance standpoint, we have a new Office 365 Compliance Center, and I already showed you what the Compliance Center looks like on-premise. The screenshot here is a little out of date. The data loss prevention and the Security and Compliance Center has been changed a little bit in the Office 365 world, but as far as the functionality is concerned, it's still very consistent with what we've got to show you here. So you can always start your story by basing on one of the 51 new security types or security information types, also called sensitive information types as well, where it comes with predefined compliance templates and regulatory templates that you can pick from a list, apply to either a site or a document library or a whole site collection, and then you do it from a DLP standpoint, where you can state a document with a credit card information cannot exist on my SharePoint platform, or you can simply prevent it from ever being shared. While it might be okay to have some sensitive information, like a HIPAA compliant information within your organization, you cannot share it externally. So having a true compliance center that can work both on the cloud as well as on premise is very important, because that's been the other gap in prior versions where you had some of these capabilities in the past. It was cloud only, which kind of defeats the purpose. If you're going to use a hybrid cloud scenario, you want your rules and templates to apply on in both use cases. The building on top of the compliance center, once you define compliance rules and templates on the site level or OneDrive level, you would initially need to set up a little bit of an integration. So for example, I've already done this step, and that's how you can kind of see how when I clicked on sites, it took me to the Office 365 world. It's important to configure the hybrid cloud scenario, and depending on your topology, you can link both the compliance templates, rules, sites, OneDrive redirection, as well as search to work hand in hand. But more importantly, it's not an all or nothing platform. If you are interested in just site redirection and you don't care about integrating search just yet, you can do that. It gives you multiple capabilities on how to fine-tune a specific component as well. While there's not a whole lot to talk about for a site redirection, search is not quite that simple. So for example, you might want to do a separate search index in Office 365, or you might want to store your index database within your on-premise system and search to kind of just invoke your on-premise database if you have a lot of content, if you have a lot of crawling and activity going on. So really, depending on your use case, there can be your topology can vary greatly. And if you look on TechNet, there is a dedicated page of predefined best practices SharePoint search architecture, and that can kind of help you get started very quickly. And we already talked about this, how we can have redirector sites from both on-premise and online. But an important capability here is you can also create site collections and sites from in both areas, but have the managed metadata that you defined in Office 365 flow back to on-premise as well. So you can truly have a unified navigation, unified taxonomy, unified term store that can work across both instances. But while we are here, I also want to switch gears in just a second and maybe show you the Security Center. And keep in mind, the Security and Compliance Center is still being fully integrated into Exchange. So some of the templates and rules that you define here is very specific to SharePoint and OneDrive. If you want the same capabilities to reflect in Exchange, there is a separate Exchange security or DLP configuration area that you'll need to go into. And while we have some of this capability here, there's a little bit of a gap between on-premise and SharePoint Online in terms of defining custom templates. You can define a broad template here and have it take effect in both areas, but some of the other reporting capabilities and policies retention areas are only available in the SharePoint Online world, while you can still restrict sharing. Reporting on top of it is still only possible using this portal. That's not a deal breaker if you'd like to simply implement a DLP capability in SharePoint Server 2016 and not ever have to integrate with the online instance. You can still do that, but keep in mind some of your reporting and analytics on top of it is going to be limited for the time being, but there's going to be a feature pack sometime in the next several months in this current half of 2016 where that bridge is going to be closed. So I just want to give you a quick overview of the Security and Compliance Center, where right from the top The alerts here are simply based on any DLP or any DLP templates that you have defined, and if you have set it to alert, it will you can view that here. The permissions and it's simply a list of who gets access to what type of content here, especially from eDiscovery. Since eDiscovery allows you to do a full organization-wide holds, you can control access to certain resources directly using the permission center. You can also do things like limit sharing to a site under a specific domain name. So if you don't want any document to be shared beyond your vendors or your clients, you can define their access points. So if they're on Office 365 as well, or if they use a Microsoft account or any Active Directory federated account, you can specify their host names, so you can be sure that only people with a specific credential can gain access to a shared resource, and also limit your users from sharing to it. Along the same line, I did talk about the 51 sensitive information types, and we've got a lot of requests on how. So I just wanted to quickly show you how that looks like in the Office 365 world. But everything I'm showing you here is also possible on premise, where, for instance, you could have a US-based personal identifiable information or NPI data filter right here, and it's going to do some automatic things like finding passport numbers, taxpayer numbers, social security. You can also club this with the Data Protection Act, or if you're under PCI compliance, you can add that with if you're an e-commerce site with PCI compliance as well, and you can create broadly a single template that can do both. But if you're under HIPAA compliance or a specific regulatory industry, there are very specific templates for that, and you can define custom search refiners to align with a custom need, like a business term internally in your organization as well. And by the way, even though I'm on the DLP screen here, the templates that I'm showing you here also works on the eDiscovery Center, that allows you to find information with the specific matches, regardless of its storage locations. If you're not interested in doing a DLP, if you're just doing an audit, you can still use the same templates to perform audits and just do an organization-wide sweep of sensitive content. So I just wanted to quickly show you the Security and Compliance Center. Obviously, there's a lot more to talk about here, but hopefully it gives you some ideas on how some of these new capabilities can help you out. So, revisiting our initial focus areas here, we looked at SharePoint Server 2016 on-premise and online, and you can see how there's a new mobile app that dramatically improves your mobile access experience. You've got improved analytics both at the site level or a document level, or at a personal level, where you can kind of see your interactions with your peers and some of your personal activity, as well as have improved insight into some of the activities of your site, if you're a site owner or if it's specific to your department. And from a cloud perspective, we've looked at least some of the integration between how you have the same unified navigation bar, the same managed metadata that can work across SharePoint Online and on-premise. You could have a single search bar that can search across Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, and SharePoint Server on-premise as well. And the new min-role deployment capability that allows you to have a streamlined topology that has physical security isolation versus just a logical separation in the past. And finally, the new Compliance and Security Center, including the on-premise in-place hold center, eDiscovery Center, Compliance Center, works hand in hand with the Office 365 Security and Compliance Center to give, for the first time ever, a comprehensive DLP, data loss prevention capability, as well as true security audits that goes well and beyond a simple search term, you can use custom-defined templates to find information, place them on hold, and use it for a legal or auditing standpoint. And lastly, although we didn't talk about this, there's a lot of under-the-hood infrastructure improvements, especially for SharePoint on-premise. We talked about a couple of these things, like zero downtime patching, where you can update your SharePoint farm without any downtime, and as well as apply a new update rollout strategy where you're not looking at utilizing the full platform from day one. If you invest in your SharePoint Server 2016 infrastructure today, there are new feature sets and new feature packs for the next several years, and Microsoft has an official roadmap that you can look at where you can see some of the new capabilities that goes well beyond what we discussed today. That's on the roadmap and is slated to be rolled out to your instance free of charge. And feature packs by itself are lightweight installations, and future updates on the SharePoint platform are going to be fairly low footprint that you can deploy and update without too much planning that we're used to in the past of updating SharePoint required quite a bit of infrastructure and management overhead, and it's being a lot more streamlined. It's easier to keep it up to date and kept in line with the latest capability. So going back to our question of should you upgrade, really your answer is going to depend on if you have invested or thinking about investing in Office 365, or if you already got Exchange but you've got a SharePoint on-premise and you're not quite ready to upgrade. That's a great use case. If you've got an existing SharePoint server that's in the 2007 world or below that, it's another great use case to jump to the latest platform, because as far as your upgrade steps for getting to 2013 or 2016, if it's going to work in 2013, chances are without a whole lot of change you can get it to work in 2016 as well. Or if you've got heavily mobile workflows that rely on mobile experience as their primary computation device, SharePoint 2016 has a compelling story there. And more importantly, if you're under a regulatory industry, and if you've been holding back on using SharePoint to the fullest potential, now you've got the tools and capabilities to truly start leveraging it, knowing that you've got auditing and compliance capabilities that's baked into the product, so you can be confident that if you're being audited or if you're under a compliance or regulation, you can be in line without relying on third-party tool sets. Before we leave here, I also wanted to quickly interject and let you know we have a dedicated product, mydoc365.com, that you're welcome to look at. That's a turnkey intranet solution using SharePoint best practices, new development model that can quickly help you get started on your SharePoint 2013 or 2016 journey by using predefined templates, document libraries, and predefined components that will allow you to get started with an intranet portal within a couple of weeks versus several months of planning and execution. That being said, if you've got any questions, feel free to ask away, or if you can think of anything at the end of this meeting, you can reply to the email that you'll receive with a copy of this presentation, and happy to follow up if you've got any questions. Thank you very much for carving up some time for joining with us today.